today I'll be discussing my final infographic and the way it emulates my model infographics. My infographic is about hate crimes in America, and throughout this video I will be discussing how this infographic emulates visual potential, including location, numbers, appearance, relationship, and time, encoding, color, text, visual hierarchy, visual language, unity and variety, layouts, and alignments. Visual potential is a form of visual communication carried out through visual aids that express what you are trying to communicate. This is based on the comprehension of your audience, not based on your own understanding. In order to use representations that viewers will recognize, through use of shapes and icons, I exploited my visual potential of appearance by creating imagery that not only I could comprehend, but what the viewer could comprehend as well. Shape, position, and realism were essential to allowing my viewer to be able to, at a glance, recognize what the infographic was about. Luckily, my color model included red, so I was able to utilize that to better create a bullet hole with blood coming out of it, representing crime. In the background, the map showed the United States as this focal center point. This was able to help me show that my topic was about crime in the United States. So now let's talk about numbers. The visual potential of numbers uses charts such as histograms, heat maps, scatter plots, and many more to represent data. I decided to use a bar chart to convey the message of the top 5 states with the most reported hate crimes. The essence of number visualizations is encoding. The encoding strategies I used for my particular data was length. The states are measured by the distance from the baseline, and the amount of deaths per 100,000 people is measured by the length of the distance from the left. I chose this way of representing my data because I felt that length would be the best way to represent my quantitative data, and it would be easy for the viewer to understand what states had the most reported hate crimes over others. Oh look, we're just in time to talk about time. Time is shown as a visual display through sequence, magnitude, and patterns. Timelines are directional and show events that occur relative to each other in a way that the reader can easily follow. I exploited the visual potential of time by utilizing the visual potential of appearance to indicate what each event was about. I created a timeline that showed well-known hate crime events from past to present. I used positioning and text in order to properly portray my message. A strength of my display is that I am able to present the viewer with the idea that hate crimes have not decreased in time based on the proximity of the events. Through positioning, I was able to place the proximity of events close together, whether they were 2 years apart or up to 4 years apart. The closer they were together, the closer I put the events together. And through this, the reader or the viewer was able to see that hate crimes have been close together ever since the beginning. One of my setbacks include the fact that the viewer might think that there was some kind of relevance for me only choosing 5 events on specific dates. Now let's talk about relationships. The visual potential of a relationship display uses lines, objects, steps, and various forms of encoding to convey a link between concepts. I displayed a relationship between hate crimes and bias similarities and differences through the use of a Venn diagram structured display. I utilized color encoding and text to color the similarities red and the differences white. A limitation in my display is that a person might get confused because so many are used to a Venn diagram that utilizes circles to portray the separate topics. But like I said earlier, I used just a Venn diagram structure. I didn't utilize circles because it wasn't it didn't match my visual language. Therefore, I left the circles out, but I still left the structure of having the differences on either side and the similarities in the middle. However, I do understand that it might be a little bit difficult to follow. Now let's discuss location. The visual potential of a location display uses various methods of encoding in order to convey the answer of where, making sure that the display is showing geographically where certain things are happening, or showing the importance of certain areas. I exploited the visual potential of location by highlighting the 2 states in the United States with the largest amount of operating hate groups through icons, text, and proximity. I use icons to properly show the shape and location of the states geographically. I use text to explain the significance of the 2 highlighted states, and I use proximity to allow the reader to be guided from the chosen states to their respective descriptions of importance. One of my strengths of the display is that it is visually appealing, and that through color encoding and size of text, the reader is able to easily grasp the concept. A weakness in my display is that the viewer may not be able to directly recognize that the text box is related to the icons of the states. Now let's go ahead and talk about my color model. So right now we're going to talk about how I emulated my color model in my final infographic. As you can see, the color model that I chose was the Pitbull color model. Now, this color model uses mainly red, black, a little bit of gray, and a lot of white. As you can see, black was mainly used for the background, black and a little bit of gray. White, as you can see from the arrows that are pointing at the text. So most of the text is white. Now red is the highlighting color. Red is used to highlight numbers, a couple of icons, and some keywords. Now let's go ahead and move on to show you how I used these colors in examples in my final infographic. So here's where you see a little bit of association in my display. I used red to associate with blood. As you can see, there's bullet holes throughout the infographic. Now having red in my color model helped because I was able to use that to associate it with blood, which was associated with crime and death due to hate. Now if you look in the background, it's black, mostly black, with white for the states. This was also one of the issues I came across, one of the setbacks I came across, because in my color model, there isn't any white in the background. I decided to put white in the background because it would help my displays stand out more. To compensate for that, I used gray boxes to separate the sections and put them on top of the countries. Now having those on top of the countries kind of diluted the amount of white that was in the background. Now let's look at a few more examples of how I emulated my color model. I emulated this color encoding in all 3 of these images. In the image on the bottom, I used a red color for the alternative sentence because it held the main point of my display. So as you can see the arrows pointing to 79 hate groups, that sentence. Now that sentence actually corresponds with the top image, that is the image of California. And I was saying that California has 79 operating hate groups. Now because this sentence had a number in it, and this sentence was basically the main point that I had for the image of California, I decided to color it red. A setback that I had was that in the image above it, it's a silhouette of a state. In my color model, the silhouettes of the states were colored white. Now I decided to color mine red because I wanted it to correspond with the 79 operating hate group fact, so that you knew to look to that. If you look in the image in the middle, I highlighted the date above all else because I felt that the date was pretty important, as this is an excerpt from my timeline. In my color model, there aren't very many dates. However, there are a few numbers, and the important numbers are highlighted. My display is monochromatic, so there were not too many colors that I had to work with. But because of the dark reds and the blacks, I was able to get a darker feel to my infographic, and it helped set the tone for kind of a darker, hateful color scheme. Now let's discuss typography. Typography is important because it allows the viewer to understand the model a lot better. It also helps with the effectiveness of your overall message. To understand the readability and legibility of the typography model, we have to look at alignment, line length, line spacing, and letter spacing. As you can see, highlighted by the red arrow on the typography model going the distance, the line length is comfortably long. The max length for a line is about 12 words long. As for line spacing, there seems to be a narrow to natural line spacing. As for letter spacing, there also seems to be a natural to narrow spacing. There are two levels of headers. The title header is about 5 times as large than the annotations or body text. The other headers are about 3 times as large. The numbers in this model are also highlighted by its size and are also a few times bigger than the body text. There is some significance to the body text as it allows the viewer to understand and fully understand the infographic. The access labels are smaller type of font. The model utilizes precision labels and identity labels, as you can see highlighted by the white arrows. On most of the bar charts, this model utilizes proximity and precision labels. The color of the text is also unified with the data visualizations that it's referring to. Now let's go ahead and look at some examples of how I emulated the typography model in my final infographic. Another important part of a typography model is font. The font in this typography model is PT Sans Narrow. Now this is the closest font that I could find for this typography model, and that was one of the problems that I faced. I couldn't really find a font that was exactly the same as the font in the model, and that was the closest that I could get. So as you can see, the bottom screenshot of my infographic is what I got, and then the font on top is the actual font model. Now let's discuss the examples that I used for my typography model. If you look at the top 2 examples, you can see how I use proximity, precision labels, and identity labels, and color in order to emulate my typography model. If you take a look at the image at the very bottom, you can see how proximity is used at the end of each bar graph. It shows exactly the exact amount per graph or per bar. This graph also uses identity labels to label what this graph is about. And it also uses proximity for the numbers to show that this number corresponds with this bar. Now, I utilize these three ideals in my examples above it. As you can see in my bar graph, I have the same structure where I utilize the color to make sure that the viewer understands that the number corresponds with the bar. I utilize proximity so that the viewer could understand what number corresponds with what bar as well. And I utilize identity labels to show what this graph was about, which was the five states with the highest amount of hate crime reports per 100,000 people. I also utilize precision labels to show the exact amount of hate crimes per state. In the display next to it, on the right, you can see how I used proximity to show that the facts in the box were related to the images on the right of the states. I also used color to show which facts correspond with which state. All right, now let's move on to the last example. So this example is the final way that I show how I emulated my typography model in my infographic. Now, if you look at the title, you can see it's significantly bigger than the body text and the annotations. I emulated this because when I put the title, Hate Crimes in America, I made sure that it was significantly bigger than the body text. I also added a smaller annotation, which was about a paragraph long, and the length of each sentence was about 12 words long, similar to my model. An issue that I had running into this was that I couldn't make the title relatively as big to the title in the model, because it would have been way too big for my infographic. Therefore, I made it significantly bigger, but not big enough to the point where it would take over too much space on my infographic. Here you see my visual language model. To understand visual language, one has to observe the level of realism and detail, level of abstraction and simplification, line weights and textures, quality of the shapes, outlines versus fills, and fill textures. In the visual language model, you can see that the boxes that separate each section are rounded rectangles that are slightly transparent. There's less detail in this model due to the various silhouettes used throughout it. Also, it utilizes natural stroke weights throughout the map and in the background. The map in the background is the most realistic portion with the detailed outlines for the shapes of the countries. The model also utilizes overlapping by overlapping some of the text with icons. Now let's take a look at my infographic and see how I emulated this visual model. To emulate my layout model, I used the same scale for major elements in my display. I utilized the same model for both my layout and my visual language. Due to this, I was able to spatially separate sections so that they would be aligned coherently, and through spaces and shapes, I'm able to group sections together. I have, on each level, I have 2 segments that fill the width of the page. Also, with the rounded rectangular shapes, I'm able to separate and group different sections. One thing that was different from my visual language was that in the background, as you might have noticed in my visual language model, the background is of one country that's outlined. Now, in this background, you see a little bit of multiple countries. However, the main focus is on the United States. The reason I did that was because I didn't want people to get confused if I had enlarged the United States, because it doesn't have a distinct shape. Therefore, I wanted it to comparatively be able to understand that they were looking at the United States. My infographic also utilizes Unity. Now, if you look at the text, you can tell that the text is unified with the color red. I use the same type of font throughout my text, and I also use the same sizing throughout my text. In the relationship display, the silhouettes are aligned, and through that, I'm able to unify that one section. There's also consistent use of blood throughout the infographic. This is supposed to give off the feel that we are talking about a serious matter of life and death, and how hate crimes in America are a serious issue. So today the topics covered were the 5 forms of visual potential: encoding, color, text, visual hierarchy, visual language, unity and variety, layouts, and alignment. These topics helped me discuss how I emulated each of these in my final infographic. My final infographic about hate crimes in America is not one to be taken lightly. This is a serious problem in this day and age, and I hope that through my infographic, I'm able to effectively communicate the issues that surround hate crimes in the United States.